Well, good morning. I know it's a lunch and learn, but I got to remember, it's still morning time. Uh, so, as Lori said, my name is Heidi Barham, and I am the manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion with Hospice of the Western Reserve. And yes, I just realized I should have put my name on the handouts, but I'm winging it. I'm using somebody else's materials for today, so forgive me. I've been with the organization for 17 and a half years. I started out as a spiritual care coordinator and then moved into this role as manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of the work that I do is really just getting out into the community, helping people understand what hospice is and what hospice is not. And Lori and I were talking earlier, and she said, yeah, we need people to understand hospice is not a death sentence. And what we really want people to know is it is a we want you to live the best life you can sentence. So we are here to help people in their journey in the best ways we can. But today we're here to talk about understanding family dysfunction in the context of patient care. So just by way of full disclosure, I have no conflicts to report, but we are required to use our conflict of interest statement. My favorite line, my family would make Dr. Phil need a therapist. As I was just telling Teresa, my family personally puts the fun in dysfunction. It is the way that we operate, and we just have learned to make it work. So I need to let you all know I am not a trained family counselor, although I am a church pastor in my other life, and I have worked in spiritual care and hospice care for, as I said, 17 and a half years, but I am not specifically a family counselor. And a lot of the information that we're sharing comes from personal experience. And we know experience is often the best teacher, right? So, why are we talking about this today? Because one thing we know, family dynamics and family dysfunction never really change. They're a fact of life. They are who we are. When you put two or more people in a room together, you have a breeding ground for dysfunction and family dynamics. Anybody agree with that? Think okay. Just making sure we're on the same page. Thinking of every holiday. Absolutely. I just officiated at my great niece's wedding on Saturday. And between Friday night with the rehearsal dinner, Saturday morning leading up to the big event, Saturday evening, it was like, oh yeah, we have lots of experiences I could talk about, but we won't do that today. So our objectives today, we want to define family. We're going to talk about family dysfunction and discuss the prevalence of family conflict, particularly when we're talking about palliative care and hospice care. And then we're going to talk about the transdisciplinary team's responsibility, which is what our role is as caregivers in navigating those dynamics so that we can provide ideal patient care. And if at any point in time anyone needs to stop me, please do. My husband always tells people I have the gift of gab and I like to talk a lot too. But if you have questions that pop up, yes, we have Q&A at the end, but if there's something that is just burning in your spirit and you're like, hey, wait, I didn't understand it, just stop me. I'm really flexible that way. All right, so let's talk about family. The definition of family over time has become a lot more difficult. Our families look a lot different than they used to. As a kid, I remember, watching the Brady Bunch and seeing the pop-up squares and how they brought three girls and three boys and they crisscrossed and made this new version of family. And back then, that was like revolutionary. Now it's pretty much every day, these combined families. So it used to be a group of persons related by blood or legal marriage. They lived together and they cooperated economically and in terms of the child rearing. And that's the cookie cutter definition of family. Heterosexual, married with children, often what we saw back in the 50s and 60s, like this image. Fun with Dick and Jane. Yes, I actually had that book as a kid. That's not my picture, but I do remember the book very well. So, K.G. Turkelson defined family as a social system. The members related through birth, adoption, or marriage. They have a strong reciprocal affection for one another, and they comprise a permanent household or a cluster of households. And he came up with this definition several years ago. And he was a medical director with, and I'm going to say this so I don't misspeak, the Family Institute of Westchester, and a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at Cornell University Medical College up in White Plains, New York. So this is, the clinical definition of family. But he also says families can take on different forms. So we have a single parent with children, we have married couples with children, we have married couples without children, and oftentimes we have those multi-generational families, which we often see when we take in the grandparents so that we can be those caregivers, but we still got the kids that we're dealing with, and that whole idea of the sandwich generation. And one of my favorite quotes, and I know I'm going to mess it up, but it's Rosalind Carter used to say there's 4 kinds of people: those who are caregivers, those who have been caregivers, those who will need caregivers, and what's the 4th one? You just caught me. Those who are caregivers will be caregivers, have been caregivers, will need caregivers. Caregiving is a fact of life. At some point in time, we're either going to give it or we're going to need it. Recently, however, researchers have been updating this definition of family based on our social structures and our norms, because we are seeing that things are changing in how we define family. And I will tell you one thing that we do, particularly with Hospice of the Western Reserve, we define family however the patient defines family. Because one thing that we know, there are different types of families. We have the family of origin with the blood ties, the traditional, we are related, we can trace the DNA and say we are family. But many times we are left with a chosen family, because many of our family members have passed away potentially, or we are estranged from our family. And one of the places we particularly see this a lot is in the LGBT community, because families have disowned their loved ones because of perceived differences in lifestyles. And so they will come into our care and they'll say, I don't have contact with my family. I don't have a family anymore. And then we find out, well, technically you do, but if they don't want anything to do with that family, we will honor that. So it's up to you to define who your family is. Now, I will tell you, as I was growing up, and I skipped a little bit ahead, how do we define family? And it's those people who are closest to you, those people you trust that will make decisions for you and on your behalf. Now, when we talk about palliative care and hospice care, and I should probably take a step back and define those terms. So when we talk about palliative care, it's palliating symptoms. It's alleviating symptoms that people may be dealing with as they're going through chronic illness, life-limiting illness. Hospice care is the next level for people who are dealing with a terminal diagnosis. So we have patients who are both under palliative care as well as hospice care. And as we're caring for patients, there's a term called fictive kin, and it is all about who the patient and the family acknowledge as kin. I have one of those crazy families that's kind of blended and adopted and tag on and tied on. There's some handouts on the table right there when you want to grab one. So I have a whole lot of family that we're not biologically related. So people frequently tease me and say, you must be related to everybody in the city of Cleveland, because I'll say, oh, that's my cousin, or that's my aunt, or that's my uncle, even though we have no true biological ties. But our relationship is such that we acknowledge one another as family. And so we want to make sure, as we are caring for our loved ones that are in our care, we are acknowledging those kinfolk as they define them. So when we talk about grief and loss, having families can be a key indicator as to how we're going to manage through that grief and loss process. If we have a supportive family with high cohesiveness, we're good with resolving conflict and have strong communication skills, those families tend to do better as we are going through the grief process. But as we get into the more intermediate level and we're dealing with psychosocial issues, increased difficulties may occur following the patient's death. And then we get into those folks that are really hard to deal with, those who are hostile. They have fewer coping skills. They're not as involved with the community, or their spiritual supports. And then there are others who are more sullen and they're at high risk of depression and grieve most intensely. And because there's so many different layers to the grief and loss, one of the things that we do is follow our patients and families for 13 months out following the death of a loved one. And we can do that in person. We have groups that meet. We do virtual. There's brochures in the back for our About Grief that have information about our community support groups. But we will follow that family for 13 months out to get through that first set of birthdays, anniversaries, those holidays that can be those triggers that will pull up that grief. And again, depending on how our family structure is, can impact how well we cope through our grief. That makes sense? Okay. So family conflict. Anybody got any conflict in your families? Witnessed any conflict? Now this is crazy. This goes back to a 2001 study, and we couldn't find any updated numbers, but I'm sure it's much higher. But in the study, out of patients in an intensive care unit, there was at least one episode of conflict that occurred in 78% of the cases. Those 3 out of 4 families coming into the ICU, there's going to be some kind of conflict. And the rest are just lying. Thank you, Teresa. Yeah. Yeah, the fighting in the parking lot. That's always a caveat. And, you know, sometimes we put on our best behavior because we're in public. And my grandmother's rule was what happens in the house stays in the house. We don't want other people to see that we're not managing this well. But what happens when you bury all of that? When you keep pushing it down and pretending it's not there and not addressing it and you don't deal with it, it's going to come up and come out, and not always in the most appropriate ways, in the most, and I'm losing my words here, but in the setting that is the most conducive for it to happen. And frequently, that's going to be in the ICU because it's a very high, stressful, intense, no pun intended, situation. I'm reminded when my godfather was coming to the end of his life, we had to make some difficult decisions because the doctor said we could do surgery. However, we've never done it successfully somebody his age. He was 89. And we knew he never really wanted to live to be an old person. So he was really like, how'd I get to be almost 90? But in the process, thankfully, we were able to come together as a unit in the unit to make that difficult decision to say, no, we're not going to do the surgery. But flip that on its head. And I remember when my father-in-law was about to pass away on my very first day on the job at hospice. And I watched my family lose their minds, screaming, running up and down the hallway, crying, just going. And I'm like, is this what I signed up for? How do you do this as a job and help people to get through that? But again, it's those emotions when they're not addressed ahead of time, they come up and they come out. And oftentimes as clinicians, we then have to try to figure out how to help people manage through that sea of emotions. So let's flip and talk a little bit about 9 signs of a dysfunctional family. And I'm not going to take credit for this. This is from a 2020 article. And I'm guessing there are probably even more signs of a dysfunctional family, but we're going to talk about these 9. Members will deny responsibility for hurtful behaviors. I didn't say that. I don't remember what you're talking about. I've never done that. And the rest of the family is standing over on the other side of the room going, yeah, you did. Members use intimidation to maintain power in the family. Those family bullies. It's my way or the highway. Certain family members' needs are expendable. Well, we don't care what that person thinks. We just need to do A, B, C, D. But in a true family, everyone's voice should matter. But in dysfunctional families, we see that is not always the case. Reality is difficult to discern because everybody's got their version of the story. And that's one of the challenges whenever you have to take witness statements after an incident, everybody sees something from a different perspective. And that was one of the challenges I always had with my mom, because I was like, I don't remember it like that, but she did. And what do we say about perception? It becomes our reality. And so it's difficult then to discern what the reality is when everybody's looking at it from their own perspective. Victims are made responsible for abusive behavior. And this is a really challenging one, because many times that is what happens. Abusers make the victim responsible for them being victimized. And we'll see that as we are dealing with our patients and their families, as they come to the bedside, as they're telling stories, as they're recalling things that have happened in their lives, that sometimes the victim gets blamed for what's happened to them. Another sign of dysfunctional family, as we talked about, the appearance is deceptive. They put on a good face and a good front when we're there, and then we leave out and we're getting phone calls left and right about so-and-so said such and such, and we want to do this, but this one wants to do that, and mom wants this to happen, and dad said this should happen, and then all of the prettiness falls away and we can see the truth behind the picture. There's no straightforward, healthy communication. I had one patient, this goes back many years, there were two sisters. Mom was 102. So the sisters were not spring chickens, let's say, and they had learned to just coexist in spaces. They wouldn't talk to each other. One would be on one side of the hospital room, one would be on the other. Mom now is in a nursing home. She's now under hospice care. And the one sister calls me and says, "Can you make my sister talk to me?" I got a lot of power in my life, but making your sister talk to me is not one of my superpowers. But I did arrange a phone call. I called the sister and I said, "Hey, I'm the new spiritual care coordinator. I'm going to be visiting with your mom. Your sister has asked if I could facilitate a conversation between the two of you." And she said, "Sure, I'll meet you up there." And then I started quaking in my boots. I'm like, what did I just walk into? But what's going to happen? We'll see, but we'll pray for the best. And the two sisters and I and our social worker and mom is right there unresponsive in the bed, start having a conversation. And what turns out is Sister A thought Sister B wasn't speaking to her because of one issue. Sister B thought Sister A wasn't speaking to her about a different issue. And it turns out they were both wrong about why the other one wasn't speaking to them. And so Sister A said, "If I have hurt you, if I have misunderstood anything, I'm really sorry." And Sister B is still going, da, 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 da. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Did you just hear your sister apologize to you? And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And then the two started talking. And we found out what was the source of the misunderstanding. And they were then able to better communicate. But for years, and I mean years, these two sisters had not spoken. Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that every hospice company will do? Like have like essentially a family meeting, but where you're kind of mediating between the two parties, or is that unique to what you do?
I cannot speak to how other hospice companies practice, but it should be a part of the care plan. It should be a part of working with that family to help facilitate the discussion. But as we'll talk in a little bit more detail, we can't necessarily fix 70 years of dysfunction in a family, because typically we only get maybe about 2 weeks with a family on average. One of the challenges for us, a hospice level of care is appropriate if all things being equal. We're looking at a life expectancy of months versus years. However, so many people are afraid of that word hospice, or they think it's only supposed to be for the last couple of days. They don't call us till really late in the game. And so by the time we get involved, we don't really have an opportunity to help them walk through all of these things, but we do the best that we can. because we understand that's part of the process for the patient oftentimes. And just as a little side note, with that situation, the two sisters, we left them in the room so they could finish talking and, really open up to one another. And we came back in and they're laughing, talking about family gatherings and family members they hadn't seen. And then they started talking about the trust fund and the bank statements and the balances. And remember, I told you mom was unresponsive. She sat straight up in the bed. And I looked over, I'm like, Mom, it's okay. We're not going to talk about money anymore. Just relax. We're just going to be here with you. And she laid back down and she was comfortable. And probably 8 or 9 hours later, she passed away peacefully. Her girls had gotten back together. They had found a connection. Now, I happened to run into them after the fact, and it wasn't all kumbaya cookies and cream after that, but they did manage to celebrate some holidays together to just try to work out their relationship. But when we talk about what brings a patient peace, they can still hear a lot of what's going on. They say hearing is the last sense to go. And so when there's all that talk, crosstalk over the patient, when there's all the arguments and the fussing, and we try to encourage, mom and dad or husband, wife, whoever it is that's laying there, they can still hear you. So maybe you want to take that conversation offline, and we'll find them a conference room where they can go, talk, or take them out to the parking lot, whatever it may be. But to try to encourage a better form of communication, because that patient is aware. They can still sense the tension and the unrest, and dare I say the dysfunction. They're not naive to it. They've lived through it their whole lives probably. But any opportunity we have to kind of bring them a sense of peace is what we will aim for. So thank you for that question. Healthy emotions are not valued. It's always interesting for me when you come into families and one has been through some type of counseling or therapy and they've learned how to manage their emotions and they've got these great coping skills. And then there's the rest of the family. And you can find out they don't want to hear any of the stuff that this one has learned. And they just want to keep living in their dysfunction. And then poor boundaries. Anybody dealt with boundary issues? Yeah. Learning how to set proper boundaries and then honor the boundaries of others. It can be really difficult, but it's really critical in helping us as we're working with these patients and families. So any questions, additional questions? All right. So let's talk about some sources of conflict. Division of labor. Anybody here have more than one child or more than one sibling? Do they all do everything equally across the board? No. And that is a great opportunity to result in conflict within the family. Particularly, and we'll talk about this a little further on, when you've got siblings who are in town managing things and siblings who are out of town managing things, it can create some challenges. Not agreeing on the coordination of patient care. And we'll talk later also about why it's important to put your wishes in writing so that all of your family members know what you want and, more importantly, what you don't want, because one of the greatest sources of conflict is when people aren't in agreement. And I will tell you, to a one, we will have families that will tell me, my kids all know what I want and they're all on the same page. They all get along really well, so there won't be any challenges. Well, that's all well and good until the rubber meets the road and a difficult decision has to be made. And that one child goes, I know what mom said, but I just can't go with that. Or I know what dad said he really wanted, but I just can't make that decision. Now, I will say, thankfully for us, when we had to make that decision with my godfather, there were 3 of us, my aunt and 2 of us cousins. And we were all on the same page. We all agreed with what he wanted, but he had paperwork done so that we felt we were on good, solid ground, knowing what his wishes were. It wasn't easy, but it was easier, because none of us were left second guessing ourselves, saying, did we make the right decision? Are we sure this is what he would have wanted? And oftentimes that is one of the sources of conflict, particularly after the fact. If someone's had to make a decision to stop a tube feed or stop artificial respiration, ventilators, anything like that, there's always that chance that somebody's going to second guess those decisions. So the best that we can do for ourselves and our loved ones is put our wishes in writing so that they are then not left having that fight. Well, I'm glad you asked. I have brought copies of our advanced care directives, which is your healthcare power of attorney, your living will, and your organ donor designation forms, because these are the forms that will help inform healthcare providers and your family what you would, and more importantly, what you would not want if you were ever not able to speak for yourself. So, unclear boundary ambiguity. Part of that is defining who's considered part of the family. And we often see this struggle in blended families, or where we have a family where there's a significant other, but there's biological children. Because then it's like, okay, who's the clear decision maker here? And it becomes a challenge because, well, this is my significant other. We've been together for 40 years. Yeah, but she's my mom and I'm 60. And so unfortunately, we then get caught with the legal definition at that point if mom has not been able to say, no, my significant other is my decision maker. Then it does default to the children. So we want to make sure that there's no ambiguity when it comes to who are the decision makers. A lot of times, one of the challenges is people want to keep information from the patient. Don't tell mom she's on hospice. Well, it's kind of hard because we are the blue people and we come in with our name tags and our logo, and then we oftentimes get the flip side of that where the patients say, don't tell my children I'm dying. Yeah, I think everybody knows this, but that is one of the issues that does come up at times where, and in some cultures, they don't want the loved one to hear the word death or dying because they think it's a sign that we're giving up. And we always say we aren't trying to strip anyone of their hope. We just want to make sure that they're hoping for the right things, for comfort, for dignity, for quality, for choice. If someone got a terminal cancer diagnosis, it's their right to say, I don't want to do chemo anymore. I don't want to do radiation anymore. Because many times the treatments are more destructive and uncomfortable and painful and cause more suffering than to let a disease naturally take its course. We will never lie to the patient. If they ask us a question, we are not going to say, no, you're not on hospice. We can't do that. That's not fair to that patient to deny them. But what I always tell people is, you know when you don't feel well, right? When you wake up in the morning and you go, oh, my head is foggy, I'm sniffling, I got a sore throat. You may not know whether you have the cold, the flu, the COVID, but you know something's wrong. It's the same way when we're facing the end of life. Our patients have a sense that something is changing, something is different. And many times they will tell us, yeah, I'm only going to be here for X number of days. And it's like, what are you talking about? And lo and behold, in a few days, they actually have passed away. I did a course many years ago called The Sacred Art of Living and Dying. And one of the things they say is people have a sense 42 days out ahead of when they're going to die. I don't have any scientific evidence to back that up, but I have seen it happen enough times that I'm like, excuse me? My grandmother signaled me 6 months before she passed away. She was like, yeah, I'm not going to be here for my 100th birthday. Well, we were in the emergency room at the time, so the nurse thought, of course you're not going to be in the hospital. I said, that's not what she's talking about. She said she's not going to be here for her 100th birthday. And this was in the end of April. She passed away on May 17th. So even in my own family, I have seen that play out. So as comforting as it may think you're being by keeping that information from the patient, they really know what's going on with their bodies. Many times, however, if it's somebody that's dealing with a dementia diagnosis or some kind of cognitive impairment, they may not fully understand. but I promise internally, they know something is different. Something doesn't feel right. Lack of communication, we've talked about that when families don't communicate. Presence of blended families, we know that's a source of conflict. Unfinished business, not wanting to open old wounds. Because sometimes those wounds have healed over and the scab is there, and then somebody just wants to keep picking at it and picking at it and picking at it, and it creates conflict. And then there's also issues dealing with mental health problems, which it is the reality of where we are. Many of our family members are dealing with undiagnosed and or untreated mental health issues. And that does impact the way we're able to communicate with one another, the way we're able to handle the situation that we're dealing with our patients and their families. So now we're going to talk about a little bit more of our experiences as team members with Hospice of the Western Reserve and where we come into play with all of this. So many times when we talk about the division of labor, this is a source of a lot of conflict in families as to who's supposed to do what. And then we come into the picture and they look at us like, oh, here comes the knight in shining armor who's going to take care of and fix everything. Unfortunately, we're not here to fix. We can facilitate, we can try to mediate, we can accommodate, but we're not going to fix 40, 50, 60 years of dysfunction in a family. And it's really not what our role is. It's up to that patient and that family. They can work on trying to resolve that conflict, but we can't just come in and magically wave a wand and say, all right, all is good. Now, there's a syndrome that I like to talk about, the out-of-towners. And it's more than just a movie. But this is when we have family members who are not necessarily engaged in the day-to-day caregiving situation. And they may not be from fully out of town, but they're not plugged in. They're not there day in and day out. And they've had limited participation. But then they want to swoop in at the 9th hour, particularly once we've elected a hospice level of care, and go, no, we can go to this doctor, and we can do this trial, and we can go to this research, and they want to fix it. They want to ride in and save the day. I had a conversation with my brother when I was moving my grandmother from her home into an assisted living. I was the only grandchild in town out of 6 grandchildren and her 2 sons. So who got all the labor? It wasn't even about a division of labor. It was all the labor. And the day that we were moving my grandmother, I had left her upstairs so that she could direct where she wanted her furniture and what she wanted done. And my brother, who was in California at the time, said, that's a really good thing you're doing because this really has to be difficult for her. I'm sorry, who is this? Who are you speaking to? Of course I know this is difficult for my grandmother. I'm the one that's been here with her trying to help her make this decision to give up her home they moved in there in 1938 and we moved her out in 2016. Yeah, that was a long time that she had to give up her home. But we had helped her finally get to that process. So yeah, don't talk to me about what she needs and how difficult this is. But it's often what happens. They come in and they want to fix things. But we also have, anybody familiar with the Martha and Mary story in the Bible? Yeah. Can you tell my sister to help me? We get that a lot. I can't tell one sibling to help another. I can't tell one child to help the spouse. We can't make them do what they're supposed to do. But one of the challenges that I will often ask or speak about is, have you asked for help? Because here's the challenge. We make it look so easy because we've done it for so long and we've learned how to make adjustments and adaptations and accommodations to make it work. And so from the outside looking in, you've got it all under control. You don't need my help. And then we have that conversation and we're like, well, have you asked for help? Well, they should know I need help. Why? You've made it look so easy. You made it look like you have everything under control. So oftentimes they feel like they're stepping on toes to say, well, let me come in and do A, B, C, D. So again, it's all about conversation, communication, and how we can work together. So this brings up another sore subject a lot of times. Who is truly the next of kin? And as we talk a little further on about why it's important to have your wishes documented, absent of documents that designate your decision maker, we're obligated to follow a next of kin. So, I'm sorry, my brain just, I had a thought there. So in Ohio, we no longer have common law marriage. Since 1991 was the last time the Ohio bar recognized common law marriage. So it used to be, when you lived together for so long, you claim each other as husband and wife, you became legally husband and wife. That does not work anymore. So you need to be legally married in order to be considered the spouse and the next of kin. And here's that hierarchy of the next of kin. So it's the spouse first and foremost, then it's children, legally adopted or biological. If there are no children or no spouse, then it would defer to the parents and then to siblings, which would include half siblings. However, when we talk about half siblings, it has to be on the half that's related. So in my family, I was my mom's only child. I'm my dad's middle child. So I have two half brothers. So we are all considered equal in dealing with my dad, but they have no say-so over my mom. Well, she's now passed away, but they would have had no say-so over mom because they were half. Their mom is still alive. She calls me her daughter, but I have zero legal rights when it comes to making decisions for her because we are not biologically related. That makes sense? Okay. Many times people think that if they're the oldest sibling, they are the next of kin. No, it's all children. So it doesn't matter if you're number 1 or number 5, all of you are considered co-equals as children. And if you cannot agree, who's the decision maker? Not a democracy. If the patient can't speak for themselves and the children can't come to an agreement, let's say you got 4 kids and we got 2 that say yay and 2 that say nay. Anybody heard of the courts? And who in the world wants to spend time in court and money, absolutely, trying to make decisions for a loved one? So now we're going to talk about advanced directives. And these are the forms that I mentioned earlier: your healthcare power of attorney, your living will, and your durable power of attorney for healthcare, your living will, and your organ donor designation. We provide a booklet. It's called Courage and Conversation. I actually have some here in the room that have the blank forms in there. All it requires is a notary or 2 witnesses to become legally binding documents. And these are the documents that speak for you if you are ever unable to speak for yourself, to drive only your healthcare decisions. This has nothing to do with finances and property and who's going to get grandma's great china and all of that. This is only about your healthcare decisions. And it only takes effect if you are unable to speak for yourself. A lot of times we'll have a family member who'll come in and go, well, I'm the power of attorney, so I don't care what mom said. Yeah, you do, because mom says she doesn't want this. And as long as mom can speak for herself, your power of attorney holds no sway. The other thing to note, power of attorney ceases at the time of death. So you may have been the power of attorney or the general POA, but once that patient dies, those papers mean 0. It may help some people in terms of, okay, well, we know you've made some decisions and had some conversations, but you don't have the power legally because that form ceases at the moment that person passes away. The other thing to keep in mind, we often will try to encourage people, anyone over the age of 18, to do their healthcare power of attorney because we never know what could happen. Case in point, how many of you recognize that name? Probably not that picture, because that's not the picture that made the news. When this 26-year-old woman ended up in a coma, and her story played out on national television for 10 years, as it went from one court to the next court, to the next court, to the next court. Sadly, after 10 years, they finally made the decisions that allowed her to pass away. And I always say nobody came out as the winner in that situation, not her husband, not her parents. And somebody sitting there going, but didn't you just say the husband is the next of kin and the parents fall down? Well, yeah, except when the parents take you to court and then the courts are trying to figure out, is this really what she would have wanted, even though you are the spouse, but you're trying to say that she would have wanted this, and they're saying, no, we know our daughter better, she would have wanted that, and she never wrote anything down, so absent of anything to the contrary, now you've got courts trying to make the decisions for her. And you got one set of lawyers and one set of court administrators saying, okay, we're going to do this, and they implement it, and then they appeal and they go, nope, stop that, we're going to go back and do this. Meantime, this poor woman is on life support, on tube feed, off tube feed, on tube feed, off tube feed. To what end? She became a household word, a household name, because she did not have these advance directives. Because who would have thought at 26 years old or 36 years old, I need this? Nobody. But if you're over the age of 18, because as I say, tomorrow is not promised to any of us, not even the next 5 minutes, if you want to be honest with everything that's happening in our world today. So the sooner we can put these documents in place and have these conversations, the better. So when we think about conversations regarding our goals of care and our end-of-life wishes, we want to make sure that people are doing their power of attorney for health care and their living will, because this does impact us in our grieving process. Remember what I talked about, second guessing, whether we should have stopped it, whether we could have stopped it, what should we have done? If we have those documents in place, we can lean on that and go, Mom put it in writing, Dad put it in writing, my husband put it in writing, my wife put it in writing, that this is what they would or would not want. And we call it courage and conversation in our booklet because it is a courageous conversation to talk about the end of life. Who really wants to talk about dying? Not most people. But we often think if we don't talk about it, it's not going to happen. But newsflash, even if we don't talk about it, guess what? It's still going to happen. Because statistically speaking, 1 out of 1 goes. 100%. And so it makes sense for us to make this the best scenario that we possibly can. Unfortunately, sometimes we wait so long and then the decisions are taken out of our hands, particularly when we're dealing with dementia and other cognitive impairment, where that person's then not able to make those decisions. And then they're forced into doing a guardianship and going into the courts and saying, hey, my loved one is incapable of making these decisions, but we need somebody to be appointed who can be the legal guardian and make decisions on their behalf. It's best to do it that way rather than trusting that the two and the two are going to finally come together and find a way to make this happen. All right. And it also, it talks, when we don't agree on goals of care, it can lead to challenges for the medical providers. Because then they're left struggling with, I mean, what is the Hippocratic Oath? First, do no harm. They're going to want to do everything. And the family's trying to say, well, no, we don't really want you to do everything. Mom wouldn't want that, but Mom never put it in writing. And so then it creates this tension between the healthcare providers and the family. So we want to make sure that as best as we can, we preclude that. Yes, Teresa.
So power of attorney ends at death.
Mm-hmm.
What would take over from there? Executor of estate?
Yes, if there is one. And then beyond that, they will look at who's next of kin in terms of decision making, in terms of funeral arrangements and those kinds of things. Okay. Being sucked into the drama. We don't have no drama, do we? So splitting is a common behavior that our teams will experience in dysfunctional families because they're trying to get us to take sides. And I don't have a side. I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't have a horse in the rodeo. I am just here to take care of the patient and to do the best job that we possibly can. But there are opportunities where one sister is trying to say, hey, can you make my sister talk to me? I can't take sides, but I can try to facilitate that conversation to help you all come to a resolution. We talked about patients keeping information from the family and vice versa, the family trying to keep information from the patient. We do respect HIPAA. That is top of the line. I mean, that is a mandate. We can't just go disclosing information. So somebody calls in from out of town and says, hey, you're taking care of my mom and I want to know everything. I'm sorry. Well, we don't have your name in the chart. We cannot give you any information. So we're not going to just share openly with anybody and everybody. And again, we're not going to hide information from our patient either. We're going to tell them if they're able to ask questions, we're going to respond honestly to those questions. I love this quote from Mary Pickford. The past cannot be changed. The future is yet in your power. What does that mean when we're talking about hospice care? We get patients in a very finite window. We don't know what led up to this moment in their history. I had one patient and the facility staff would always say, I can't believe the parents did this. And how come they're not doing that? And how come we're not doing that? I'm like, you got the good side of this person. You get to see them in this moment where we all feel sorry for this patient because they're facing the end of life. They've had to live with 30, 40, 50 years of difficulty, of dysfunction, of abuse, of whatever it may have been. So all we can do is look at how do we make this the best going forward. We can't change and undo all of that. So the team does not have any control over the dysfunction, but we do have control over how we respond, that we don't get sucked into it, that we respectfully say, you know, I'm here to address this today. What can we do to help in this moment? And I'm looking at my time. Oh, yeah, I need to speed it up just a little bit. So how do we navigate through the dysfunction? The team has to communicate with one another. So we have weekly team meetings, but we also in between times we'll say, hey, I'm going to see Mr. Such and such or Mrs. So-and-so, anything I need to know. So we're all on the same page so that I'm not going in saying, oh, Mrs. Smith, I think you should do A, B, C, D. And then my social worker on the team comes in and goes, oh, Mr. Smith, I think you should do E, F, G, H. And we're creating more dysfunction on top of what already exists. So we want to be a united front on the same page and then recognize when the family is trying to split the team. Because you know, oh, I like this nurse really well. So I'm going to talk to the nurse and see if I can get this out of the nurse. And then I'm going to talk to the social worker and you'll see we are a cohesive unit. It's why we call it a transdisciplinary team. If I don't know the answers, I'm going to get you the answers from the person who can. How do we navigate? Still focusing on our role in the task at hand, acknowledging what we just talked about, the past can't be changed, and look at the future. Redirect the family focus on what they have control over. You know, sometimes part of the anguish that we're dealing with is their grief that they can't fix what's wrong with their loved one. And especially if it's a younger person, you know, they're struggling with, why is my child sick? Why am I watching my husband die? He's too young for this. And so helping them focus on what they can control. We can't change that, but what can we control? What can we do to make this experience better? What are some of the things that we can do? We have a lot of life enrichment opportunities, moments to remember, things that we can do to bring a better quality of life to make this experience better for them. If it looks like we need it, we can involve our bereavement coordinators early rather than later to deal with the anticipatory grief. This is especially key a lot of times when we're dealing with younger parents who have children who are young. We can get involved early to try to help them navigate the anticipated grief that they're going to face. If the family's trying to split, we will make sure we have one point of contact. Okay, look, I know there's 5 of you, but we only are going to communicate with one, and then you can disseminate the information to the rest. Or we will have one big family meeting and bring all 5 of you in, but we're not going to keep ping-ponging from one to the other to the other. We talked about boundaries and how hard it is to set good boundaries. But one of the things we'll come in, what can we do for you today? We're going to make a finite window of this is an opportunity for us to work today. I can't go back and fix all this stuff from yesterday. I can't project what's going to happen in the future. Let's look at and talk about today. When we're in the middle of family meetings, sometimes they do start to fight, bicker, argue, whatever word you choose to use. We will try to redirect the conversation and stay focused on the current issues. Because again, that's when all that stuff comes bubbling up and bubbling over and boiling out. Stay away from trying to fix the past, focus on the future. What are we doing right now? And if we can't get them on the same page, or at least reasonably on the same page, at least in the same book, we will stop the meeting and say, you know what, we need to stop this right now because we're not advancing. The last thing we want to do is have people come to blows. And unfortunately, yes, that has happened, but we try to keep that from being the outcome. How the patient and family have coped in the past can be a good indicator of how they're going to cope now. If they've been a strong, cohesive unit, they're likely to stay a strong, cohesive unit. As practitioners, we have to be aware of our expectations of a family. My family doesn't function like your family, and I'm guessing your family doesn't function like your family. We cannot put our expectations on other people. It's a recipe for disaster. I'm just saying. And remember, there's a lot of history we don't know about. We get just the tip of the iceberg. Like I talked about my one patient. We only see that good part up there, that little window. There's a whole lot floating under the surface. So just out of curiosity, any experiences that you've had that come to mind as we talk about these dysfunctions? And if not, it's okay. Any questions up to this point? Because we're about to wrap it up. Yes, Teresa, you get an A. The A students ask all the questions.
So you talked about, let me go back. You talked about how you can't deal with the past. You need to focus on the future and what is happening today. Is it helpful for the hospice staff to get a sense of what those last 50 years, whatever, have looked like in order to keep the communication flowing?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that clarification. We do a lot of things. One thing we do is called life review, where we will go back and we'll talk about what are the historical things, what are the accomplishments, what are some of the things that we need to know about you as a family. And we do a full comprehensive psychosocial assessment. And a lot of that will come up. But when I say we can't go back and change the past, we can't go fix the fact that you were an alcoholic through somebody's childhood and now all of that is coming up. It's helpful for us to know that that's a challenge that you're dealing with, but we're not going to be able to change it. So absolutely. All right. Just a quick review. Family dynamics are not going away. They are a part of who we are as people. As clinicians, as caregivers, we have to learn how to navigate through them, setting appropriate boundaries when dealing with family conflict and dysfunction. We're not going to fix it, but we can help our patients, families, and our team navigate through it and move forward. And the key at the end of the day is communication. The more open the lines of communication are, the better we're going to be able to manage. So it's my understanding they're going to ask you to do, before we get to Q&A. And then I'm going to leave it to Lori in the back, and then we can answer if there are any lingering questions.
Yes, and our online Zoom people, I will drop the link to that evaluation in the chat here in just a moment if you're not able to scan the QR code, so hang tight for that. And also, if you would like to ask a question, Zoom participants, please type that into your chat box and I can get those questions to Heidi so she can answer them. And I do have one that came in via an email. And I know I sent it to you previously to see, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it here so everybody here can hear the benefit of both the question and the answers. So the first question is how to navigate a caregiver who is mentally ill, manipulative, and isolates the care receiver.
I'm gonna say this, and I know it couples in with the second one. A lot of times appearances are deceiving. And we often will project and classify somebody as being mentally ill, manipulative, because they're not doing what we think they should do. So without having specifics, I don't want to overgeneralize and say you do A, B, C, D. Again, it does require open communication. I will tell you one of the challenges we often will see is, particularly with spouses, they go into protective mode. They don't want other people to know what's happening inside the house because they're trying to manage the best that they can. And so we think they're shielding us or keeping us away from the patient. Sometimes that is the case. But if they are the legal next of kin, if they are the designated caregiver, we can't necessarily force our way in. We have to abide by what their wishes are. Now, the second part of that question, Lori, will lead to my final answer.
Yeah, is how to identify elder neglect and abuse.
And my pat answer, without knowing specifics, is Adult Protective Service. When in doubt, that is the best route to take. They are experts at evaluating and investigating when we think there are issues of abuse or neglect. Many times it's just poor coping skills on the part of the caregiver because they don't feel like they have anybody they can reach out to. And this identifies opportunities for us to bring in additional supports. Maybe they need a passport so that they can get healthcare workers coming in. Maybe they need respite care because they're dealing with their own health issues and they can't navigate how to take care of themselves and take care of the person they're caring for. One of the challenges we often see is caregivers go before the care receiver because they put themselves on the back burner. They're not going to their therapy sessions. They're not taking their medications. They're not going for the testing. In my own family, my aunt died in January. Her daughter died 9 months later because she had put her own health on the back burner. So by the time they found the cancer and were trying to deal with it, it was so far advanced. And so when we're dealing with those caregivers, a lot of times it is just poor coping skills. I don't know how to ask for help. I've never had to ask for help, and I'm not ready to start asking for help. But if we call in the appropriate people to come in, maybe we can get them better situated where they will allow someone to come in and help. And I think I just saw something pop up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if anybody has any questions online, go ahead and drop them in the chat. Anybody in person in the room with us have a question, I can get the mic to you, and that's just so our Zoom participants can hear us.
Could you say your name again, Heidi?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And your title?
It's Heidi Barham, Barham. And I am the manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion with Hospice of the Western Reserve. And forgive me for not putting it on the cover slide.
Is it on any of the info back here?
I have my cards with me. Yeah. Yes, Henry.
Do you have the healthcare?
Power of attorney. Yes,
Yeah.
I have them right there in the back
Okay,
of the room.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And if our people online go on to Hospice of Western Reserve's website, can they get the
Yes.
materials that are here for our
Yes.
in-person folks? Great. So I will send that out in an email to everybody after today's session.
Awesome.
Anybody online? It's a quiet group today.
Maybe that means I answered all their questions.
I mean, you're just that good.
I wouldn't say that. Well, thank you all for your time and attention. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I've just got a couple more things to add to this. We record each and every one of these sessions, and this is where you can find them. If you know somebody who wasn't able to join us today and you want to give this information to them, or you would just like to revisit and rewatch, this is where you can find them. So if you go to our website, which is www.dhad.org, What you see on screen now is our homepage. Just below that picture of the lovely lady enjoying the fall weather, you'll see a circle there that says I'm a caregiver. We've got the red arrow pointing to it here. So you'll click that, and this is what our caregiver page looks like. You'll scroll down just a little bit and you'll see Family Caregiver Noontime Knowledge Series, and you will see our upcoming schedule. It gives a little blurb about what we will be presenting and a link to register. And as you continue to move down the page, you will see, let me back up. You will see missed a session or want to watch, click here to go to our entire playlist. You can find every single session that we've done so far since January. So that's where you find all of those. So please do continue to share this information about these sessions. Let other people know that may benefit. Keep coming back and seeing us. And until then, we'll see you in, what's this month? August. We'll see you in September. Holy smokes, September. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Heidi.